Welcome to the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex.
Today we're talking about The Witcher Series 1, a full kind of recap, review, and when we come into the spoiler territory, we will signpost it really well. You can find us on social media.
Patreon.com/geeknerd. We're on Facebook /The Geekly, Twitter @GeekNerdPod, and our website is geeknerdpod.com. Plus, we're also on Podchaser, so you can find us, leave a review, ratings, comments.
All your independent podcasters really want that for Christmas is reviews, and word of mouth, likes, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you like what you hear, interact with us in some way and let us know what you think.
Great. So, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. I think this is really, really close to being a good show. I can see potential here. I think this is a strong first step, but it's ultimately quite a flawed show. I really enjoy Henry Cavill as Geralt. Every time he was on screen, I thought, great, this is what I imagined Geralt to be. I think the show was at its best when he's kind of the Witcher being the Witcher, and when another character who, I don't know if it's spoilers to say her name or what she does, but when she is doing her thing as well, kind of the main female character.
It's fairly well known that like the trinity of the Witcher is Yennefer, Ciri, and Geralt.
Yeah, so when Yennefer's doing her thing, the show's really strong. When Geralt's doing his thing, I found it really strong. When it got into kind of what I would describe as maybe geopolitical territory, I wasn't really into that at all. As a whole, as a show, I would take this over The Mandalorian.
I was actually thinking along similar lines because this season of The Witcher does a very similar thing that The Mandalorian did, in that Geralt kind of goes around and we meet very significant people in his life for a specific purpose, which The Mandalorian does as well, but The Mandalorian didn't do it well. Whereas here, the gathering together of characters felt very organic and very natural. So yeah, I would definitely take this over it. Personally, I'm a bit spoiled by Watchmen. That's my new bar of what great television is. This isn't great, but it's good enough. I did watch it twice. I enjoyed it more the second time through. The first time through, it took me about 3 or 4 episodes to really get into it because I was struggling to keep up with everybody's names and the names of all the places, because they just kind of dump you in the world and they don't really handhold you, which is kind of nice. They have a few tricks for delivering exposition really well, which I do appreciate. I think the main flaw of this show is that it is very, very much like the game. It's not a bad thing. I mean, it made me want to, I was watching it and I was like, I'm going to go play Witcher 3 now, which I did. And then I got confused every time Henry Cavill's face didn't show up on my screen. But there are things that work in books and in games that don't necessarily work in television or film. They just look kind of cheesy. I think the monsters, for one, weren't very well done. Some of them were kind of comical. There were a lot of moments that were really sort of cheesy and comical that shouldn't have been. And I think it's just that, it's obvious that Henry Cavill has studied the game. I mean, his mannerisms, his speech, everything is exactly like it is in the game. And great, people who love the game will love that. But I think they needed to change up some things to adapt it more appropriately for TV.
Okay, well, I think at this point we'll probably move into spoiler territory, so if you haven't watched it yet, you want to be surprised,
hit pause, go watch all 8 episodes, and then come back and listen to this.
Maybe watch them twice if you're like Lex. Okay, let's dive in. I think this really does need to triple its budget and then potentially see what else, kind of go down the back of the sofa, Netflix, and kind of bring out a bit more. Because as much as I liked, some of my favourite parts of this season were when Geralt was actually engaging with, he's the Witcher, he goes and fights these beasts, people hire him, they give him these bags of coins, bags of gold or whatever. I love that, I love seeing him fight, but in this day and age, I was kind of a bit surprised because Netflix, they're not short of a few quid, I was surprised by how kind of ordinary some of them looked. He fought Kikimora in episode 1, which was the first time we ever saw him. Great kind of entrance, but it looked, kind of 10 years out of date, the Kikimora. The Djinn was okay because it was mostly mist. The Striga, I like that fight as well.
The Striga was so gross.
Yeah, with
the umbilical cord dragging around. Yeah. It was just
and I like the kind of, I think I don't know what they were, but kind of skeletons coming from underneath the ground. So right off the bat, the budget needs to increase. But I think with a few minor tweaks, this could be. I know a lot of people are looking for their next Game of Thrones type show. This is obviously far smaller cast, far smaller stakes, because Game of Thrones was so fucking vast. But this could be that. I think with a few little tweaks here and there, this could be that.
Yeah, I think this has the potential to be better than Game of Thrones. I really liked the way the timelines worked in this, because you start off with like 3 different timelines. Yennefer is the earliest, Geralt is kind of present day, and then Ciri is in the future. And as we go through the season, the various timelines kind of merge together. So Yennefer catches up with Geralt, and then Geralt catches up with Ciri, and you sort of have this kind of coming together, and you get this wide swath of history of the world in a very natural sort of way, rather than a bunch of people standing around saying, 50 years ago, so-and-so invaded here and did this and blah, blah, blah. Also, Jaskier, who delivers exposition quite a lot in a meta-fiction sort of way. He, acknowledge. I think at one point he says, and there I go again, delivering exposition.
Yeah.
And he's also quite useful for keeping track of how much time has passed. It's like when the Jen comes up, he mentions that it's been at least a decade that they've known each other, and so they should be calling each other friends by now. So you get that kind of... And I think Yennefer does something similar when she actually catches up with Geralt's thing. She mentions that she's been at court for 3 decades. So you get these kind of little hints, because none of it is signposted. You just bounce between the 3 of them, and you have to piece it together, which I kind of liked.
Yeah, I largely didn't like the non-linear narrative in this. I thought it was basically being used as quite cheaply, and it was if they were building up to this gotcha moment of, you thought you knew what was happening, you don't, and it didn't work for me. But I can forgive it, because I found out that this whole of this first season was based on the short stories, and moving forward they're going to be moving into the novels, which I assume will be kind of more chronological or commonly used narrative structure. But I didn't particularly like it.
There's no way that they could do this for every episode. For every season, because they obviously did it for every episode this season. I would say this season is very obviously a prologue, and I think the showrunners realize that as well, because you don't get the actual full title sequence, which was really cool, until episode 8.
Absolutely.
You just get these little images or these little symbols at the beginning of every episode, and then in episode 8 they finally come together and form the Witcher symbol, and you get the theme song and everything. I kind of was of 2 minds of this. I thought, they have an entire season, the entire first season is basically just a prologue, but then it's how else are they going to do that? There's so much territory that they had to cover, and so much backstory they had to get through. They really couldn't have just dived right into the main story without having this prologue season.
Was that guy the Bard that you were just talking about? I hated the Bard. He was comfortably my least favourite part of the season, because I felt like this... I really like the...
I knew you were going to say that.
Because tonally and atmospherically, I thought this was spot on. Do you remember when we watched the first episode of The Mandalorian, and I said, it's just too funny, that it's too light of humour. Everything else about this show was far more dark, and this was not Disney, and I loved that. But every time he was on, I felt that Geralt was kind of burdened by him. The show had its own brand of humour, because I think on 3 occasions Geralt is presented with a really terrible situation. He'll just be stood there very stoically, and he'll just go, fuck. And that was great, and that's kind of a humour that I think can exist in this show going forward. But the Bards was just a nuisance, and my comment I wrote beside him was, Jesus Christ, why? He was just nothing more than kind of comic relief, and it didn't fit the show. So I kind of was hoping that he would die off every time they came up against a beast. Kid's got, he's like a cat. It's got 9 lives. I hope he doesn't come back in season 2.
He's a regular.
I feared that might be the case. Yeah.
He's much more annoying in the game than he is in this, and his name is Dandelion in the game, and potentially also in the books. I'm not sure. I haven't read the books. I've only played the games.
Does this make you want to read the books?
I was thinking, I should read the books and see what it's like, and then I was thinking, how many times in how many different forms can I consume the same story? Video game, book, TV show? Yeah. When is it oversaturation? But yeah, it did make me curious about the books and about the portrayals, mostly because I know the kind of portrayals in the video game. There are so many similarities between the game and the television show. The TV show is basically like watching somebody play the game. Yeah. Essentially. The aesthetic, everything is exactly the same. So I was really curious about what it's like in the novel and how much detail is given, and I guess which Mostly, I think I would read the novels to find out which source material the television show relied on most heavily, the game or the books, which is probably the games, because I think that's what most people are familiar with.
Is it Nilfheim?
Nilfgaard.
And Nilfgaard. I think I was getting confused with Niflheim from Doom Patrol. I think that's what it is. You know, they're currently trying to conquer the whole world. And that was the storyline that was going through all of the episodes, really. What did you make of that storyline?
I mean, it's not the most inspired storyline. It's a pretty common trope in the fantasy genre, particularly in fantasy role-playing games. There's always this one group of people that wants to take over the world, and everybody else is battling it. Like it reminds me a lot of Skyrim and games like that. I kind of viewed it as secondary, probably mostly because like Geralt isn't actually involved in the politics of what's going on. You know, he just kind of he says several times he doesn't take sides.
Yeah.
He obviously does, and Jaskier points this out to him. It's like, you know, you never take sides until you do, which you always do. It wasn't the most compelling storyline. It could have come from anything. I mean, like from Star Wars to Game of Thrones to Lord of the Rings. Like we constantly have this narrative of, you know, this one society trying to take over everybody else and for the greater good, and there's this like religious zealotry. We don't know a lot about it at this stage. They just mentioned the White Flame, which I presume is something unique to Nilfgaard, because the Nilfgaard mage, she refers to like her being a cousin to the rest of the mages rather than an enemy, so it's somewhat related. Like you said, I wasn't as interested in the kind of geopolitical moves as I was in the monster hunting and Geralt's actual story.
They felt like quite a convenient plot device just to move people around the board. I thought this show, like I said earlier, was at its best when Geralt was kind of being like given money to go and tackle issues. I don't want the show to be case of the week, you know, like a crime procedural where every week he's got this particular beast that he has to go and take on. But it was so great when he was, you know, alone in like a tomb or like a kind of catacomb kind of situation, because other than Swamp Thing recently, I haven't really seen a show that's lent into kind of the horror as much. I just think that was where it really works for me, and I'd like probably to see more of that. It doesn't need to be case of the week, but let's have The Witcher being The Witcher.
Yeah, I think they could do that very easily without it falling into a case of the week. Because of the nature of the story, he's constantly traveling, and his reputation often precedes him. So he goes one place.
Everybody knows who he is everywhere he goes.
Everyone knows who he is. He's this like revered monster hunter, and he can't really go anywhere without somebody running up and saying, "Hey, we have this monster we need you to kill." So it does come across very naturally, like as he's going around his business and fulfilling his quest, he encounters these monsters that he has to defeat or as a way of making more money. Again, like, I can't help making comparisons to The Mandalorian, which did a very similar thing, but it felt more forced than it did in The Witcher. Even though most of Geralt's story in this season was kind of a monster of the week sort of scenario, because we had the two stories of Ciri and Yennefer propelling the narrative, it didn't feel so repetitious.
Yeah. If I had my way, I'd have shuffled it completely, and I would have had it probably more chronologically told, and I would have had Ciri put in episodes 6, 7, and 8, just because I felt it was very... Her story, like their stories were told over like decades. Her story was kind of told over like maybe 10 days maximum.
Yeah.
So maybe just put that where it deserves to be, just over maybe 2 or 3 episodes. But Yennefer's story and Yennefer's character arc were probably the best. Like, as much as I prefer Geralt as a character, just because, you know, I like that whole killing
he doesn't
killing
really
beasts and
evolve.
stuff. Not at all, no, yeah.
So, like, he didn't have a character arc. We were basically, his story was just kind of keeping track of what he was doing on his way to find Ciri, whereas Yennefer did actually, she had the most dramatic arc out of everybody.
And it was really great TV. You know, being called Piglet because she lived in a pig pen, bought for 4 marks when a pig cost 10 marks.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the worst beginning to a story ever. And at the end, she's this all-powerful mage. She summons, was it fire magic or something, which was one of the forbidden magics or something? And she uses that to kill this whole group of people, like a load of people. It's proper scorched earth, biblical stuff.
Like literally scorched earth.
Yeah. And that was just a great character arc. I like their interplay, and I like that they weren't together in every episode, and it showed that over the decades their paths had kind of crossed many times. I liked them together. I thought they had good chemistry, and they seem evenly matched. she even like outwits him, which, you know, typically you don't get. You know, the guy or like the main character, it's called the Witcher after all. They're normally, you know, women swoon and women just suddenly become idiots around these men. She was a really good counterpart, I thought, during the whole of this season. So yeah, I look forward to seeing how their story kind of evolves.
Yeah, it was interesting seeing her beginning, because like I mean, I've obviously encountered her in the game, but I haven't read the books, and I've only played Witcher 3, so I don't really know what the first two games are like. The only encounter I'd had with Yennefer before the series was her as this like super powerful, kind of seductive sorceress, directing her own life on her own terms kind of thing. And so it was interesting seeing her beginnings and how she progressed from this very sort of meek, scared girl to inarguably one of the most powerful players on the board.
Yeah, I think her story might have been my favourite story.
I think the interesting thing about The Witcher is that the main characters aren't likable. Yennefer is pretty selfish and cruel, and she's like power hungry and kind of everything you don't think of in a hero, and Geralt is sort of moody and aloof and doesn't really give a shit, and they mention quite a bit that Witchers supposedly don't feel. We don't get his confirmation either way on this. Like the one time he's asked directly, he says they say whatever they want to say to justify othering us.
Beyond Geralt and Yennefer, I thought it was kind of slim pickings for anything else of any kind of worth, either in acting or either in kind of storyline. I know they are the two kind of main ones, and obviously Ciri kind of felt slightly secondary to them. I think that might go along with budget. I feel like we need maybe some big names potentially coming into the franchise to kind of help share the load. I don't think it's quite the same thing as, you know, with Daredevil, you know, Charlie Cox and Daredevil, and we say nothing about it quite works enough for him to be able to carry that brand by himself. You need that ensemble. I think Henry Cavill's better, and this Geralt is better than that Matt Murdock and Charlie Cox. But I think this needs a little bit more impetus with budgets, be able to get some big people in on contracts to help make it feel a bit stronger.
Yeah, and I think because there are a few other characters that are kind of staples of the thing, like Triss Marigold is also a quite important character, but you didn't really get that sense from this season. She's
not at all. She was very.
She's one of my favorite characters.
In the show.
No, in the game.
I was going to say, because in the show she was.
In the show, I was quite disappointed because in the game she's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the other mages, with the exception of the kind of the evil mage, whose name I can't remember, they were all very similar. They were all kind of these meek group who at the end finally found their strength and were able to hold off various groups of soldiers coming from different directions. But other than Yennefer, there wasn't much. Even like the head mage, I can't remember her name either.
Tesselia DeVry.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, even, you know, you'd hope there would be a bit more, some characters in the mages, but there weren't really. And so other than Geralt and Yennefer, I found it to be slim pickings. And so every time they weren't on screen, I think the show suffered. It needs them to be kind of in every scene, I would say. They don't need to be together in every scene, but there isn't enough strength on the bench.
Yeah, they need to raise the profile of some of the other characters so that the show doesn't rely entirely on Yennefer and Geralt. Yeah. I expected a bit more from Ciri than this kind of helpless princess. I see no resemblance between her and the Ciri that I know at this stage. So I was kind of waiting for her to show some sort of badassery. Maybe next season we'll get that after like she spent some time with Geralt. I don't know. Even her introduction, they sort of implied she was a little bit of a street savvy, not your typical princess sort of thing. But then once she was on her own, she kind of fell into that trope of needing to be taken care of by various people. Yeah. And I expected her to flourish a bit more than she did. She seemed to like lose her strength as the season went on, which I found disappointing.
What did you make of the finale? Because I thought the finale was slightly anticlimactic in the sense that, in a similar way to the Battle of Winterfell, Jon Snow was a passenger throughout the whole thing. And as much as, I'll accept this was kind of Yennefer's battle as much as it was anybody's battle, but having Geralt kind of incapacitated for the entirety of it, I'm not saying he needed to be the man to come in and save the day, save the women, but I could have done with him coming in and like killing, 30 people with his sword. And I was just thinking, 20 minutes left, 10 minutes left, come on Geralt, where are you? and he never kind of got there, which I was a little bit disappointed.
It is a weird choice when you have a show called The Witcher that in the season finale you completely incapacitate the Witcher, especially because Yennefer is definitely the great power, and I don't think having Geralt involved would have diminished her kind of final moment at all. It bugged me that he meets up with, or he gets taken care of by this farmer who's heading back to his house. Ciri gets taken in by the farmer's wife, and then they come together, but Ciri sneaks off and runs into the woods.
Yeah.
And then Geralt shows up at the house, and suddenly Ciri's running towards him. It's like, why did she even run into the woods at all?
It might be like that thing they say, if you're in the Arctic tundra and you walk, you'll walk in a circle because everyone has one leg shorter than the other. Maybe she ran in a circle.
Both times I watched it, that just like really, really bugged me. It was just like, she ran off in one direction and ended up coming back in exactly the same direction. It was like, what was the point of her running off like that?
Yeah.
I wanted their kind of meeting to be a bit more spectacular,
Yeah.
I think, or to have a bit more significance. I actually didn't like that the season finale was basically kind of a showdown between the mages and Nilfgaard. I felt like the Nilfgaardian storyline was kind of secondary to the kind of prophecy and the idea of destiny and stuff like that, and they spent an awful lot of time in the last episode focusing on this political conflict rather than the idea of fate and destiny that they'd set up throughout the season. So yeah, it was a bit anticlimactic.
Yeah. Talking about Ciri, you've just reminded me of her grandmother, who was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed her in battle, in court. Other than Geralt and Yennefer, yeah, she was like probably my third favourite character. So we've both said that this is good but not great. Would you like to maybe give a recipe of how to, and quote unquote fix, I don't really mean fix because this is a strong show, but how to fix this in time for season 2?
I would say the thing they need to do is step away from the game and embrace the fact that they're telling a story through the medium of television.
And kill the bard. What next? Oh yeah.
He's much more annoying in the game than he is on the TV show.
I think I vaguely remember him from the game. I've not that far into it, but I vaguely remember him.
Yeah, he's much more annoying in the game than he is in the television show. Of course, he has kind of a mild purpose in the television show of like keeping time and stuff like that. Yeah, I would say 1, make the monsters look better. I mean, it's coming out of Netflix. They've obviously got the funds to like really invest in a show like this, and I think because so much of the rest of it looks really good, that when the monsters show up looking kind of half-assed, it really diminishes what's going on. And, you know, we talk about that with His Dark Materials, how good the demons look. There are no rough edges. They look like they belong in the world, whereas these monsters, like the Gold Dragon was probably the worst, I think.
It was a shame, wasn't it? Because we're in a post Game of Thrones era, and Game of Thrones got a lot of things right and got certain things wrong, particularly in the final season. But the dragons were just a gift from God. They were so
spectacular,
so good.
dragons. I was really disappointed by the dragons in this season. So yeah, we need more money for the monster effects. You need to step away from game mechanics. And again, I would say like the monsters are at the level of like video game graphics. So basically, step away from the games, guys, and do something different.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The budget needs to be tripled. I would say that you've done really well with your casting and your storytelling for Geralt and Yennefer so far. Give us more of them. Give us less geopolitical. I would say I can forgive the non-linear narrative in season 1 because it's, you know, based on short stories. They don't necessarily fit together perfectly, but they've all been told now, and now we're moving into the novels. So I just hope the narrative style is traditional narrative style moving forward. Give me more of The Witcher slaying beasts. It doesn't need to be every single episode, and also lean into the horror, lean into the darkness. I can't think of many shows on TV, like I said, that are doing that kind of right now. Swamp Thing kind of did that, and it didn't survive particularly long. The creator of this show has said that there are stories planned out for 7 seasons of this. If it can last that entire time, I'd say, just be different, be unique, go for that kind of the horror element. Not every episode, but give us that, because nobody else is really giving us that at the moment. I really liked Henry Cavill in the role.
I would also like to see more about the Witcher's abilities.
Yeah.
They showed a little bit, like they had him do the Ard, which is only one of the abilities he has. They mentioned him being able to smell things kind of briefly, but I wanted them to go more into exactly like what the Witchers can do, and the, you know, we got the history of the mages through Yennefer and how they come into being. And we didn't really get that about the Witchers. He sort of insinuates that it's not a very happy process being turned into a Witcher. But yeah, I would like more of Geralt's backstory and more on his what he's able to do, and I think they can do that really easily if they give us more monsters, better monsters, so we can see him actually kind of fighting. One of the things we haven't mentioned so far is the battle sequences. The swordplay in this season is fantastic. Like, I could watch it endlessly. It's probably some of the best choreographed fight scenes I've seen in a while.
Yeah, and he does particularly well. He's clearly put a lot of time and effort into the role. You just mentioned his sense of smell. Yennefer, I love the moment where she said, "You need a bath. I can tell what breed of horse it is and the colour of
the
horse.
The age, breed, and colour of your horse by the smell."
Yeah, which was great. Again, great interplay between the two of them.
All in all, a decent first season. I'm quite happy to continue watching and see where they go from here, despite the fact that this was essentially a prologue, which, you know, I think is a fairly successful prologue, because sometimes when shows get bogged down in backstory, it can feel like, you know, we aren't really going anywhere. But I didn't particularly feel like there were any filler episodes in this season.
Did you have a favourite episode?
It's difficult when you watch them all together. They sort of blend together. Like, I really liked the Dryads. I thought they were kind of cool. What about you?
Possibly the Striga, because I think that was basically as good as an entire episode of him going up against an enemy that someone had paid him to deal with. Yeah, I think this was strong, and I think this is a really good marker. And if they can kind of grow it exponentially, hopefully with a bit more money, and they can see that this has got some fairly good reviews so far, I'm hopeful for the future. I mean, yeah, they plan to do 7 seasons, so if it grows a bit every year, this could be something to challenge Game of Thrones, or to kind of fall into that niche.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think for something as ambitious as the Witcher stories are, this is a really good first outing. There aren't a whole lot of problems to it. The flaws that I could point out could be solved with a bigger budget, and yeah, it's one of the better things on TV out there at the moment.
So yeah, thanks for tuning in. This is the last podcast for this year. Thank you for subscribing and listening and liking and reviewing, and we'll be back in early January.
Yep. Happy holidays if you celebrate them. If you don't, you know, have a good December.
Merry December.